Welcome to this week's story time. And this week we're telling the stories The Snake's Tales by Marguerite W. Davol and illustrated by Yumi. This book is signed by the author. The Snake's Tales. Way back in time, there were no stories. Season after season, the earth turned from day to night to day. People worked and ate, slept and woke, but they didn't tell stories. Believe it or not, people simply didn't know what stories were. So how did stories finally begin? Listen, and I'll tell you. Once upon a time of no stories, a family lived at the edge of a forest. Each day, Papa gathered his goats and herded them to a distant meadow. "Hi-yi," he would call. "Here's grass, green and sweet. Eat and grow fat." Papa passed the long hours staring at the distant hills, the sky. Sometimes he played his fiddle flute, but never a story crossed his mind. Each day, Mama cooked and cared for their children, Bino and Lita, and she spent long hours spinning wool, then weaving the yarn she dyed into tapestries with intricate pictures and patterns. But never a story entered her mind. One summer morning, Mama called her son. "Strawberries are ripe in the field on the far side of the forest," she said. "Pick enough berries to fill this basket, Bino, and we'll have strawberry preserves to spread on our bread tonight." So Bino took the basket and tramped through the forest. When he found the strawberry patch, Bino began to pick the juicy red fruits, pausing every now and then to pop a berry into his mouth. They were good. He picked until his basket was full. Heading home, Bino came upon a clearing in the forest that he'd never seen before. In the middle was a large flat stone, just the right size to sit upon and rest. Bino sat down, but he didn't notice the snake coiled around the base of the stone until it glided up right beside him. "Hello, young fellow," the snake said. "Hello, snake," Bino replied. Leaning over the basket, the snake hissed, "Those strawberries look sweet." "They are," said Bino. The snake looked at Bino, its eyes gleaming. "Give me your strawberries, and I will tell you stories," it said. Stories? Bino had never heard of stories. What were they? He was very curious, but he hesitated. The strawberries were for supper that night. Bino stared at the snake, wondering. Finally said, "All right, take some strawberries and tell me what stories are." And so the snake began to weave its tales. It told stories about how the stars once were bees and what makes a rose smell sweet. It told stories about why monkeys live in trees and what lizards like to eat. And after each tale, shloop, shloop, the snake ate strawberries, captivated. Bino listened for hours, and then he looked down at his basket. "Oh no," he gasped, "the strawberries are all eaten." He looked up and saw the sun hung low in the west. "It's late. I must hurry home or Mama will be worried." And grabbing his empty basket, Bino dashed off through the forest. The snake flipped its tail, swish, swash, and then slithered away. When Mama saw the empty basket, she exclaimed, "No strawberries?" Bino didn't want to tell a lie, so he said, "The snake ate them." "A snake?" Mama asked doubtfully. She didn't believe him, and Bino was sure Mama never would believe him if he told her about the stories. He said nothing more, but kept thinking about the snake's tales, puzzling over each one. When Papa came home that night, the family ate their supper of bread and cheese with no strawberry preserves. One midsummer day, Mama called her daughter. "Raspberries are ripe in the bushes on the other side of the forest," she said. Pick enough to fill this basket, Alita, and we'll have raspberries and cream for supper tonight. Alita took the basket and skipped through the forest. Upon reaching the berry bushes, she began to pick the plump red raspberries. She picked and picked, popping a berry into her mouth every so often. So fragrant and so sweet. When her basket was full, she started to head home. Alita happened upon the same clearing in the forest, a clearing she had never seen before. She saw a large flat stone that looked just right to rest upon. She sat down, but Alita didn't notice the snake coiled around the base of the stone until it glided right up to her. "Good day, young miss." "Good day to you, Snake," she said. Leaning over her basket, the snake hissed, "Those raspberries look so sweet." "Ooh, they are," said Alita. Its eyes glittering, the snake said, "Give me your raspberries, and I'll tell you stories." Like Beano, Alita had never heard of stories. She was very curious, but she hesitated. Finally, though, Alita nodded. "Take some of the raspberries," she said, and tell me what stories are." And so the snake began to weave its tales. It told stories about where fireflies go by day and what makes the sky blue. It told stories about why frogs croak and owls ask, "Who, who?" In between stories, shloop, 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 the snake ate the raspberries. Mesmerized, Alita listened for hours. As the sun slid behind the trees, she saw that her basket was empty. "Oh, no! All the berries are gone, and it's getting late. I must hurry or Mama will be worried." And she picked up the basket and ran toward home. The snake flipped its tail, swish-swash, and slithered away. When Alita returned, Mama looked at the empty basket. "No raspberries?" she exclaimed. Alita, who never told a lie, said, "Oh, Mama, the snake ate them." "The snake ate them?" Mama repeated, shaking her head, and Alita knew Mama would never believe her, so she said nothing about the snake stories. Instead, she kept all of them to herself, trying hard to remember each one. That night, the family ate cheese and bread for supper, with no raspberries and cream. One day, early in the fall, Mama looked from Alita to Beano and back again. This time, she would send both of them. "Apples are ripe in the orchard on the other side of the forest," she said. "Fill this large basket, children, and tonight we'll have apple pie for dessert." So Alita and Beano strolled through the forest until they found the apple orchard. Stretching tall, they pulled the round red fruit from the trees. They picked and picked until the basket was full and heavy. Each of them hoisted one side of the basket as they walked, and each ate a juicy apple. Now, when the children reached the clearing, they stopped short. Looking at each other, they both smiled. "Stories?" Beano whispered. Alita nodded. "More stories," she said. The two of them sat down on a large flat stone and waited. "Do you think the snake eats apples?" they asked each other. Sure enough, the snake glided up and looked into their basket. "Greetings, my friends. Those apples look sweet," it hissed. "They are," Beano and Alita chorused. "Well, if you give me your apples, I'll tell you more stories," the snake said. This time the children didn't hesitate. More than anything, they wanted to hear stories. "Oh, yes, please," they replied. And so once again the snake began to weave its tales. It told stories about how the first snake got its hiss and why the tortoise and the hare aren't friends. Stories about how the world began and where the rainbow ends. Finally, many tales later, the snake said, "Oh, I'm so hungry." And stretching its jaws wide, very wide, it began to swallow the apples one by one. Glump, glump, glump. And after many apples had disappeared, the snake stopped. Stuffed with apples from mouth to tail, the lumpy snake bumped slowly through the grass. Balump, balump, balump. Almost too heavy to move. Bino and Alita picked up the half-empty basket and ran for home. It was late, and their mother and father would be worried. When Mama saw the apples in the bottom of the basket, she said, "Good! You've picked enough apples for a pie." "Now, don't tell me. The snake ate the rest of them?" The children put their hands over their mouths and giggled, but they said nothing about stories. Surely Mama wouldn't believe them. That night, the whole family ate hot apple pie for dessert. As Papa started on his second piece, he said, "What a strange sight I saw today on my way home. At the edge of the forest, I nearly stepped on a snake. The fattest, lumpiest snake imaginable. It was so fat it could hardly move." Bino and Alita began to laugh. In fact, they laughed so hard they could barely gasp out, "Stories! Stories! Many, many stories!" "Stories?" Mama and Papa were puzzled. "Well, what are stories?" With their eyes shining in the candlelight, the two children took turns retelling the snake's tales. The very next day, Papa began to tell stories. He retold the snake's tales and then began to tell some of his own. First he told them to his goats, and then he told them to other goat herds, and those goat herds told stories to all their families and friends. Mama began to weave stories into the tapestry she created. She told stories to all who came to buy her weaving, and they told stories to their families and friends. Through the years, Alita and Bino told stories too, to anyone who would listen. And they always started each one with, "This is a snake's tale." Season after season, year after year, the earth still turns from day to night, night to day. People still work and eat, sleep and wake, but now they tell one another stories. Stories that circle the earth and are passed down from generation to generation. If you ever go into a forest and find a large flat stone, just right to rest upon, sit down, wait. A snake might just appear with new stories to tell. But be sure to bring along some fresh fruit, perhaps strawberries or raspberries, but no apples. Oh, I love that. Well, till next time, have a great week.